So, what is anxiety? Anxiety is an emotion, and it's characterized by a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease. And it's typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. Alright, now that we talked about what the definition of anxiety is, let's move on to the epidemiology of it. Some really nice, important, and enlightening statistics for us to look at, to relate to, and just to be informed. So, in a given year, there are about 12% of people who are affected by an anxiety disorder. And this isn't just experiencing anxiety as an emotion, but those who have an anxiety disorder. What's the difference? Well, we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, at some point in their life, instead of the year, there is 12 to 30% of people who are affected by an anxiety disorder at some point. So now the statistic goes up to almost 30% for a lifetime for anxiety disorders. Again, this isn't just anxiety, it's the actual disorders. Next, anxiety disorders occur about twice as often in women than they do in men. Twice as often in women versus men. And generally, anxiety disorders, they begin before the age of 25. So that's really, really early if you think about how long a human being lives. Next, anxiety disorders are actually the most common mental illness in the United States, and they affect about 40 million adults age 18 and older every year. 40 million adults every year. Alright, so in a given year, about 12% are affected. A lifetime indigestion. So yes, anxiety and even stress can cause indigestion, and it could even change your bowel movements. It could also give you a dry mouth, and it really can contribute or exacerbate IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, for those who have it, because the stress hormones that are released in an anxious state can have a really big impact on bowel function. And respiratory shortness of breath can be one of them, not being able to breathe properly. We have cardiac symptoms, palpitations, we have tachycardia, which is basically your heartbeat going faster over a certain heart rate, and even chest pain can come with anxiety. If we move on to muscular, there could be fatigue or tremors. You can find yourself trembling, tired, and cutaneous, sort of your skin. You could be sweating a lot or even a little, but perspiration is one of them. Your skin might even be itchy for you. And lastly, for urogenital, there are lots of things that could happen, but it really surrounds urinations. It could be too frequent, or there could be an urgency always there, or there more than usual, and even impotence could be a part of anxiety. And we could also have dyspareunia, which is a difficulty or having pain during intimate moments. Next, we're going to compare anxiety versus fear. So, some people might have a confusion between the two. When you're anxious, that just means you're fearful, but it is not the same, even though they're often used interchangeably, meaning someone would, basically think that you can use either word for each other. So, what are the differences between anxiety and fear? Now, firstly, anxiety is considered future-oriented, versus fear, which is considered present-oriented. So, anxiety is concerning something that might come in the future, while fear is concerning something that is in the present at that moment. Next, what kind of response is it? Anxiety is like a long-acting response versus fear, which is short. And we'll sort of talk more about it as we write down the rest of what anxiety and fear are, because they're all sort of linked together. So we have long, broad, diffuse for anxiety, and short, specific, clear for fear. Anxiety versus fear. So anxiety is considered future-oriented versus present, long versus short. And when it says long, it means that it is a long-acting response. Alright, it's a long-acting response that is broadly focused on a diffuse threat, whereas fear is a present-oriented, short anxious, the 4 ways that anxiety can manifest in somebody. And he was also a professor at NYU. And so, while I list the 4 ways that you could be anxious, I hope that you're able to relax a little bit and listen to the writing sounds of the iPad pen tapping and scratching on the iPad. And I'll put a timestamp below for when I'll be back to explain this all to you guys and talk to you guys about it. But for welcome back, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. And now we will actually go over what we wrote about, the 4 ways to be anxious. So, the first one. Firstly, there is anxiety in the presence of an existing or imminent external threat. So, remember that it is existing or imminent, and it is an external threat. You worry about the event and its implications for your physical and or psychological well-being. And when a threat signal occurs, it signifies either that danger is present or near in space and time, or that it might be coming in the future. Non-conscious threats processing by the brain activates defensive survival circuits, resulting in changes in information processing in the brain. It actually changes it because it's controlled in part by increases in arousal and behavioral and psychological responses in the body that then produces signals that feed back right directly back to the brain and complement the physiological changes there, intensifying them and extending their duration. So basically what happens is that when there is an external threat that is currently there or is about to come, you as a person, you end up worrying about it. You end up worrying about that threat and what it would do to you, what it would do to you physically, and what it would do to you psychologically. Now, because that threat, that external threat, it is existing or it's going to come, when it eventually occurs, when that threat signal occurs, it signifies basically that, hey, danger is here, or danger is coming very, very soon. And so your brain processes that and it activates these defensive survival circuits. And it's basically what it says. It's a defensive measure so that you as a person could survive. And that results in changes in how your brain processes information. Isn't that sort of crazy? The way that you perceive and interact with threats actually changes the way your brain processes information around you. And so this is controlled in part by the increases in responses that your body gives because of that threat. And because your body feels that threat and it shows those symptoms of anxieties like we talked about before, it feedbacks to the brain. Your brain's like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling really nauseous right now, or I'm feeling like I have a headache, or I'm sweating, or I'm trembling. And these physiological responses in the body, your brain picks up on that and it complements it. Now usually when you think of the word compliment, it's supposed to be a happy thing, right? But this time it sort of goes in a negative direction where it complements those physiological changes and it intensifies them and extends their duration. So not only does it make it worse, it makes it go longer. So if you are sweating, you'll start sweating even more and you'll start sweating even longer. It sounds sort of gross, but when you're experiencing that anxiety and you're experiencing those symptoms of anxieties like we talked about, which are honestly, a lot of them are pretty horrible. You wouldn't want to experience them on a normal day. Your brain basically feedbacks on it and makes it worse and makes it go longer. So that is the first way that you could be anxious. memories, they have power. They have power to our well-being. An episodic memory of a past trauma, of a panic attack in the past, that is sufficient to activate our defense circuits, our survival defense circuits, like mentioned before. So what can we do? We can try not to think about it. I know it's hard, but we have to try to focus and not let these thoughts or memories control us or make us worry. And it's not a one-time thing. I think that's what can trip a lot of us up, thinking that I conquered this really big mountain once, and that is so good. I am so happy for you. We're also happy for you, and it is a great accomplishment. But we have to remember that this is a marathon, it's a life marathon. It doesn't just happen once and we're over it. Sometimes it can happen again in the future. It could be frequent or infrequent. But the important thing is that we have to be prepared in knowing that it can come again. And I think that's a really important step, because if we expect it to come, that we expect it to, that we expect there to be a bad day in the future, I think when that bad day actually comes, we won't be so disappointed by it, because it wouldn't be unexpected. And so we were prepared. We could tell ourselves, hey, you knew this was coming and you're prepared for it, so let's get over this certain day or period and it'll get better. And it's a process and it's life, but you can handle it, and there it is. I think that thought process helps, for me at least, when I'm dealing with a trigger or a trauma that is reoccurring and very random at times. Alright, now moving on to number 4, the last way that you could be anxious. Thoughts and memories may result in existential dread, such as worry about leading a meaningful life or the eventuality of death. These do not necessarily activate defensive systems. They are more or less pure forms of cognitive anxiety. Do you think you have a lot of these thoughts of life, of death? It's a kind of existential dread. So when we say thoughts and memories may result in existential dread, memories could be how we're remembering how we did XYZ up until now. I've only done this, or I've only failed through this. I haven't done this compared to my peers. And that's how memories can result in existential dread. Just remembering what we've done, what we have or haven't accomplished, can give us these thoughts of worry. And basically they're a pure form of cognitive anxiety, meaning it comes all from our thoughts. It's all internal in our brain that results in this dread and worry. Now, they don't necessarily activate our defensive systems, but it still gives us anxiety. Alright, so those were the 4 ways to be anxious. I hope that clarified certain things about anxiety, or maybe you could have related to some of them, or even all of them. And we're going to be talking about something really important called anxiety disorders, like I mentioned. So how does anxiety, just normal anxiety, become an actual disorder, to be something that is so prevalent among people? And the emotion of anxiety, it basically can persist beyond the developmentally appropriate time periods in response to a specific event. So what is a definition in terms of the difference between the two? Well, anxiety disorder is for people who experience anxiety most of the days during approximately 6 months. And for children, it's an even shorter time period. So imagine experiencing anxiety most of the days for 6 months. And that's why anxiety disorders are among the most persistent mental problems, and they often last decades, a really, really long time. So it's a very chronic and debilitating disorder that can affect a lot of different people. Now let's talk a little bit about anxiety disorders and their risk factors. Now, what are risk factors? It's basically things that can put you at risk for anxiety disorders, if you put it simply. And there are a lot of different things we can talk about. So firstly, there's neuroanatomy, and it's exactly what that word says, the anatomy of our brains. The neurocircuitry involving the amygdala, which is part of our brain that regulates emotions like anxiety and fear. And also another part of our brain called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is also implicated in emotional memory alongside the amygdala. Now these two parts of the brain, they're thought to underlie anxiety, and so people who have anxiety tend to show increased activity in them. Number 2, genetics. So genetics and family history can put someone at increased risk for an anxiety disorder. But generally, external stimuli will trigger its onset, basically its beginning, or exacerbation, basically making something worse. So genetics alone can't activate it, but it can put someone at increased risk. And the reason why they thought of this is based on studies of twins, where there was 25 to 40% of genetic influence on anxiety, depending on the specific type and age group of the study. So next we move on to number 3, medical conditions. This is really important because a lot of us, so many people have medical conditions, and many of them can cause anxiety, including conditions that affect the ability to breathe, or abdominal or chest pain that is caused from a condition. There could also be some sort of sexual dysfunction that can cause anxiety, or conditions that affect the face or the skin. And these conditions can basically cause anxiety for us as well. There are also other life-threatening conditions like cancer that can cause anxiety. So medical conditions can basically lead to someone feeling anxious, and it's something that we should keep in mind. Next, we have substances, substance-induced anxiety. Now, things like alcohol or even tobacco smoking can cause or worsen anxiety, or sedatives, including prescriptions or opioids, which include painkillers given from the doctor, so a prescription painkiller, or like an illicit drug. Next, we also have stimulants, and these stimulants, we actually consume a lot of it, like caffeine. Now, many people report self-medicating their anxiety with these exact substances, taking a little bit of a drink to relax or smoke a little bit, but improvements have been shown to be short-lived, and in the long term, it actually worsens anxiety. Sometimes there could be acute anxiety as soon as the drug or whatever substance wears off. So number 5, we'll move on to psychological. There are many things that could contribute, and one of them could be poor coping skills. Sometimes anxiety is also linked and perpetuated by the person's own pessimistic outcome expectancy, and basically how they cope with feedback negativity. Next, there could be cognitive distortions. A really good example of evolutionary psychology of increased anxiety, because increased anxiety can serve the purpose of increased vigilance regarding potential threats in the environment. And so this may cause false positive reactions, but those individuals can actually avoid real threats. This might explain why anxious people are less likely to die due to accidents. For example, it's been shown that within a school of fish, timid fish are more likely than bold fish to survive a predator. So there's that little evolutionary psychology potential aspect. Lastly, we have social. Now this is obviously a very big portion as well. There is the history of trauma, and basically just having that history could be a risk factor for anxiety. It could be in terms of bullying or parental or cultural, or something very important that isn't talked about a lot is socioeconomic. People who weren't able to receive an education, who aren't employed, who are impoverished. Alright, next we have treatments. A lot of the things that we talked about, it really points towards lifestyle changes, changes in our life, how we think, how we act, what we eat, what we do. So there's exercise, regular sleep, reducing caffeine, smoking cessation. They have benefits as great, alright, or greater than medication, which is amazing. And a lot of us can do it, and a lot of us can do it for free, which is really awesome. Next we have counseling, and there's something called CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. What it means is it's just therapy so that we can change the way we think, to change the way that our brain behaves. And lastly, we have medications like antidepressants that could improve our symptoms. Alright, we're going to lastly move on to discrimination, and then our video would be the end for today. But discrimination, people with anxiety disorder, there might be a stigma around it, and they could be challenged with misconceptions about what exactly is anxiety. When we talk about misconceptions, there was a data analysis from the National Survey of Mental Health Literacy and Stigma. They found that firstly, many people believed that anxiety is not a real medical illness, that anxiety disorder isn't real. And secondly, that they believed people with anxiety could turn it off when they wanted to, so that it's something that they could choose to turn off. And for people experiencing these stigmas, they basically can make that person less likely to seek treatment and end up self-medicating themselves with those substances that we talked about before, which can cause that loop again of making anxiety worse for us in the future. Alright, so this is the final product, guys. We talked about what anxiety is, some statistics that went along with that. We talked about all of the symptoms of anxiety, what it is versus fear, the 4 ways, and a lot about anxiety disorder. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I really hope that you learned something today. I hope that this helped you in whatever